This is my 1975 Honda GL1000. In the last video, you guys gave me a lot of positive feedback about it when I showed you guys the bike and I told you guys I bought it. For the most part, everyone was positive. And you guys pointed out a lot of things that were missing on the bike, and I also knew of most of the things that were missing on the bike, and it also has a few issues because allegedly it's been standing for a few years and the only thing it's really gotten is a carb clean. Let's run through all the problems this bike has and the non-OEM original parts on the bike. I would say this bike is about 75 to 85% original, but there are a few key things this bike is missing, and some of them are a little annoying to get, and some of them are just small things that I need to order and we can fix immediately. If you guys missed the last video, this is my 1975 Honda GL1000. I rode this bike home, and even though I rode it home, it still has a few things that it definitely needs before I should ride it more, I guess I should say. In 1975, it was the first year that Honda introduced the GL, or the Goldwing, and they spent about $1 billion developing these things. In 1976, they cheapened a lot of the parts on this bike because everything in the 75 model year was very expensive to produce. The 76 bikes looked the same and had basically everything the same as the 75 bikes, but the quality of the parts in some cases was reduced. Now there's a bunch of things that they changed, I believe, and off the top of my head, I don't know all of them. From my understanding, Honda in 1975 used a lot of billet aluminum pieces. Billet aluminum basically is a block of aluminum that's cut down to make a certain piece instead of kind of molding a piece. So it's much more expensive, and a lot of pieces like that were used on this bike. Definitely got to look into that and understand that a little bit better. Now, since we're on the topic of OEM pieces, let's talk about all the non-OEM parts this motorcycle has before we get into the issues that this bike has. Now, probably the biggest thing that this bike is missing are the spoke wheels. These have Comstar wheels. I believe the rears are actually CX wheels. This was a very popular, in fact, it was probably even a dealer option to have these alloy wheels, but the spoke wheels give their own look and it's a proper piece that it should have. Working on sourcing a pair of spoke wheels, it should not be too hard, but it's definitely something that this bike needs, and it makes it look a little odd almost that it doesn't have any of the fairings and stuff, and it has the alloy wheels. Now this bike had a big fairing in the front, had the big luggage box in the back, and that's the reason why there's also a couple other pieces that are missing and why those wheels were most likely changed at some point in its life. Now there's two things that are missing in this shot alone. Number one is this piece right here should not be shiny aluminum. It should be paint matched. Just like here, it should even have a stripe on it. I have both the pieces sitting in a box on the side, and when I went to go buy the bike, I mean, we realized it immediately and saw them sitting on the side, so that's not a problem. This bar here, again, this bike had the fairings and luggage racks. It unbolts super easily, not a big deal, but this plate right here should actually say Honda on it. I believe the later models said GL1100 on it or GL1000. I believe in 77 they went, or 78 they went to the 1100, which is why I would say 1100, but this should say Honda. I don't know why this was changed, when it was changed, whatever, but that's a piece that I need to source because this is probably a Chinese knockoff, and well, I'd like to have it original. Other than that, everything else looks pretty proper. Probably will have to go through the carbs, but we'll get to that in just a second. Now, a big thing about this bike is not only does it have the stock seat, I have the kind of pillion double seat sitting on the side that I'm selling right now because I do not want it, but also it has the original exhaust, which is a pretty big positive. Most of these original exhausts were taken off, put later model exhausts on, or like Harley pipes on the bikes to make them sound louder. The one thing that this bike is missing right here is an original rear shock suspension. The bike is missing an original shock, the rear suspension, that's also broken. But it's missing the rear shock here, and usually it would just be the regular spring system that all the bikes have. For some reason, the guy put air shocks on it. Now in the last video, I was trying to put the bike on its center stand, and a lot of people commented, well, you shouldn't have that much trouble putting it on the center stand. No, I should not. And I even said it in the last video, I was missing kind of a vital piece that would help me put it on the center stand. There should be a ring here, and this ring here should incorporate the turn signals, I believe, and they should stick out a little bit different, and this tail light should be up here. Now that ring would help you. You'd grab the handle, you'd put the stand down with your foot, and you'd grab the ring that would be around, or the rest, or whatever you want to call it, to get the bike up. And then that should also mount turn signals from my understanding. I could be wrong on that, but I thought the turn signals did sit out a little bit more wide. This is the original light, and I do have the original bracket that brings the original taillight back up. Once again, because there was a box set up on the back here and the luggage box, the light needed to be lower. That hits the entire time when you ride. It is awful. So before I start riding it more, this is going to be tucked back up there whenever I get to fixing this bike back up. Now coming back up here, I'm lucky that all of these work, all the switches work and everything like that. All the lights work. The gauges have seen their better days, and maybe I'll rebuild the gauges just because they are a little sun faded or sun cracked or whatever you may want to call it. But these grips, so there's this cruise control here, which is not original, and the grips are also not original. These grips are absolutely horrible. As you can see here, because of the cruise control style system, it doesn't want to snap back on return, and it makes it really annoying to ride. This isn't going to be a cruiser for me on the highway or anything like that, but it's just going to be a bike that I want to enjoy. And, well, I like having the throttle response be predictable instead of this lazy throttle, which I'm sure would be nice on the highway. So the cruise control system needs to go, and that is not original. Now, since the last video, I've given this bike a nice detail, kind of buffed the tank, and the paint has come out really nicely. If you guys remember, everything was kind of just super dusty and faded and everything, and the paint came out really nice. I mean, for the age, I believe this should be original paint just because of how it's faded. It's in good condition. The rest of the bike needs a little bit of touch up, like these mirrors have a little bit of pitting and corrosion on them and small stuff like that. So an overall little detail wouldn't be the worst idea in the world once I start getting some of the pieces in and parts in and working on the bike a little bit more. Now, I believe that's all the stuff that's been changed on the bike, which isn't too much. It's not too bad whatsoever. Just a couple annoying things like the shocks and the wheels to part and get parts bikes most likely. Parts bike is probably going to be a cheaper option for me to get everything that I need, and then grips and stuff, well, those are just available brand new. Now let's move on to the issues this bike has and things I need to address and maintenance items that this bike might need. This could potentially help you guys if you are looking for this bike or even have one of these bikes as well. Now, like I said, I rode this bike home. It rode really nicely, but there's a couple of things that needed to be adjusted, and one of those, actually two of them, I guess. The front and rear brake could use a bleed. The brakes seem to be all there. Just when you park these bikes, most of the time you need to rebuild the calipers, but in this case, I mean, the bike stopped. It just felt like there was air in the system. Probably will do a brake job on the bike, maybe get a stainless line here, bleed the system, check the pads. Rotor should be just fine, but pads, potentially calipers, kind of see how everything's going. The other thing was the clutch line, something we noticed immediately. The clutch line is starting to kind of show its age, and something that I'm probably going to want to change before I ride the bike more. Now, this is a running bike, but something I noticed and something we noticed when we started the bike up the other day is it is smoking a little bit, and it's not smoking because it's got coolant in the oil or anything like that. The oil actually seems pretty decent, but it's smoking because we believe a valve might be stuck, and you can kind of hear a little bit of tapping as well on the motor that would indicate that. It kind of goes away after the bike warms up, so that's probably the case. Regardless, it's something very minor and something that just needs to be tweaked. If I start the bike up for you here, this is cold startup and probably will fire up right away. I forgot the throttle was on a little bit. The choke went down. I saw a little bit of smoke potentially, but you can kind of hear a little bit of chatter from this side of the motor. Not the end of the world, but something that needs to be addressed. Now, I said the previous owner went through the carburetors. He did go through the carbs, he cleaned them up from my understanding, but he definitely didn't sync them up properly, and that's something I noticed almost immediately when the bike was fired up for the first time. It doesn't quite seem like all the cylinders want to be at the right RPM, and also when you give it throttle, you can feel that the bike is hesitating a little bit if you do try to give it a little bit more power than just regular cruising. That would indicate that the carbs are not synced properly, so we're gonna have to go through, sync them up, figure out why this return isn't working, and if it is because of the cruise control, get rid of the cruise, but also probably freshen up the cables on the inside there as well to get the bike synced properly, and also just go through the bike one time, flush the coolant out of it, flush the oil out of it, do a timing belt job because this bike has a timing belt on the front of the motor. It's a pretty simple job and something, well, I might as well do before I start riding it. Here's a better shot at that clutch cable right there that you can see. it's kind of starting to fray a little bit, and I don't want that to break on me while riding. So I'm just gonna go ahead and replace it. Like I was saying, now it seemed like I listed quite a few things, but honestly the bike is pretty solid overall. Like I said, I rode it an hour home, 45 minutes home, and the bike did not give problems other than just not wanting to stop really nicely and not wanting to run evenly on all cylinders because of the carburation being a little bit askewed. Now, if there's anything you think I missed in terms of something that's not original, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm gonna go a little bit deeper in terms of the things I said: timing belt, spark plugs, maybe spark plug wires, oil, valves, checking the clearances, and just doing a whole refresh on it. Even though the bike has low miles, it's been sitting for multiple years on end, which could be another reason why the valve is sticking a little bit. And I mean, it could just end up fixing itself, because sometimes they do that when you ride them. But before I ride it, I want to be sure that it's a small thing and a small issue that I can fix and correct before it does any type of damage. Before we end the video, there was one thing that I just remembered that this bike does need. So it's a very minor thing, but if you come under the glove box, you take the glove box out, these flip open, as you guys may know, and there's supposed to be a stop washer. That stop washer is supposed to keep the knob in place so you don't have to put the knob back in, kind of like this, and the knob's supposed to rest here. My hands are in the way, but this is a piece of cardboard that my dad, when we bought the bike, put on here so that this screw wouldn't have to be taken out every time you open the side cover here. Instead, what this washer does is essentially just keeps it there, so when you want to put it back, the knob's already there and it didn't go anywhere. Now that's all I have for this video. If you guys enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe as always, and check out another video on one of my other motorcycles. Now, how do I get this back in?